Hello, BookTube, and welcome to the conclusion of Sagalong 2021. This is a BookTube event that I've been doing with a bunch of other great BookTubers. I'll leave them all linked down below, in which we have been reading Icelandic sagas. And in previous years, we have done that in a sort of a la carte fashion. We've each picked the sagas that we're going to do and talked about them. So you got a nice broad range, and there was some overlap, so you would get to see very different readers. Because with the possible exception of Mark Richardson and myself, this group is composed of very different readers. You would get to see different readers talk about the same saga. This year, we decided to do something different. More of that, actually, because we decided that all of us would read the same saga for the whole of the month. And there's only one saga conventionally understood that will bear the weight of a whole month of reading, and that is Njal's saga, the longest of the family sagas. And that's what we've been doing throughout the month of April, and now we're finishing up with the last month in May. This is it's an enormous and sometimes enormously frustrating Icelandic saga, in which I know this is a terribly modern and Western thing to say, but in which it was hard for me to know what was the point of it all. Sagas are a type of literature that very much do not need a point. If they have one, it will be in a more tenuous fashion than, for instance, a much later kind of plot will have. I just had to get used to that, that's all, and it takes some getting used to. But fortunately, whoever the genius was who originally assembled all this material and then wrote it down did their absolute best to make it easy for you to enjoy this book, because we are reading this about 40 segments a week, and I admit the first 40 segments didn't really do much for me this time around. I'd only read this book, I think, a couple of times before, and once in the presence of a very charismatic teacher who sort of carried it along. That's the risk you run with a very charismatic teacher, is that they will carry along the work for you and sort of they'll caulk over your need to investigate yourself to make it make sense for you. And I think that teacher largely did that, and then there might have been an issue with the translation, because I wasn't. I know I was using the old Penguin Classic translation by Magnus Magnusson, and a couple of people in Sagalong have used that translation. I haven't seemed to have the problems with it that I have, so maybe it was just me. But after those first, and also there's also something to do with the saga. I don't think the saga really makes a whole lot of sense until you're well along in it. You have to sort of commit to it. Those first 40 segments, I don't think are going to hook many people. But then, as events pile up, as you start to know people, as you start to realize there's this weird, horrible pattern, this pattern of cycle of violence that's going on in the book, and that's escalating. Once you get a sense of that, and a sense while you're reading along of being trapped in that, along with the characters, then the thing just takes on a life of its own. And you want it to keep going until you don't. Until you don't. I switched to translators for my second week and did the later Penguin translation, and then I went to the Victorians, who have never let me down with translation, and I read the Descent translation, D-A-S-E-N-T, which is free on Project Gutenberg and a whole bunch of other places. It's all over the internet. You can download it for free. And once again, the concession that you have to make to the Victorians, once you get used to their idiom and to the weird nostalgic things they're doing, then their vision as a translator I almost always prefer. And I was going to pick up another translation for my last segment here on Njal Saga, but I couldn't do it, so I just stuck with the Descent translation. And I mentioned last time that the violence has been escalating throughout Njal Saga. It has been getting worse and worse. There's this annual event. People bring tent pavilions and set up shop and hammer out deals, we assume, and there is a rock for the law. You go, and the law is venerated. Everybody knows about it. There are experts on it, including our title character. And that is supposed to mean something, but increasingly in the course of this saga, that means less and less. As this horrible seesaw of revenge violence just gets worse and worse, just grows more and more out of control. Last time I mentioned that you know that it's completely out of control when it creeps into your own family, when it's no longer emissaries or employees of yours who are fighting each other and killing each other, but your own family turning their own hands against each other. And that happened in the last segment. And it was only a matter of time. Once that happens, you know that the end for Njal himself is written. And it happens in the section that we're reading, the concluding section that we're doing today. It contains the signature burning of Njal, the burning of his household, and his death. And it's virtuoso. There are a couple of incredibly virtuoso action sort of set pieces in this concluding 40 segments. It's grim. It has a whole bunch of undertones that I would probably want to research or maybe experience again. I am certain now that I've read this, in such a great group of readers and so closely, and for me so slowly. I feel certain now that I'm going to come back to this saga again, and that who knows how much of it will lay itself open to me in those subsequent readings when I'm older than 28 and have a little more experience with the world. But one way or another, like for instance, I mentioned last time that in the last 40 segments that we read, Christianity comes into this world where it had only been a rumor before, and starts to kill people and starts to convert people and starts to become a force in the land. And I look at something like that and I think, well, then surely that informs some of the undertones of the burning of Njal, who is not burned. He's not disfigured by the flames when his body is recovered, but it does have crosses on it. I little things like that, details like that thread their way all throughout here, and that also thread backward to the earlier segments, including those early and disappointing 40 segments that I read. Stuff like that, that's the sort of stuff that does become clearer to you the more you read the same book over and over again. I have this on my brain because I reread the Iliad every June and I reread the Odyssey every August, and I'm just, it's May now, so that's right around the corner. And I find something new every time. I would stop that practice. I'm not quite Catholic enough to like dead ritual. I would stop that practice if I weren't getting something new every time, but I am. And I have a feeling that would probably be true with Njal Saga as well. The only problem with the segments that I read today, these concluding segments, is anticlimax. This has been such an exciting last 100 segments of this book. Have been so thrilling. You never know when blood-curdling violence is going to break out, and the author of this book is right there when it does. This person wants to narrate that violence as beautifully and engagingly and entertainingly as possible, and does every time. But you kind of know that the burning of Njal, I mean, you can tell from the title, that you kind of know that the burning of his household, the death of Njal, is the climax and really the end of this book. But it isn't quite the end. It descends into even more squalid chaos after that, because once that happens, and once violence breaks out at that annual law meeting, that all thing, you know that nothing is left here. Things have descended into complete chaos. But unfortunately, although complete chaos can be interesting to read about, unfortunately, once Njal exits stage left, there are no interesting characters left. Not really, not fully fleshed out. It's only once Njal died that I realized how much I was going to miss him, so to speak. I realized that how slowly and gradually he had been built up as a character over the course of the whole book. And there isn't really anything that can be done in these last few segments to simulate that. There are characters, they're colorful. Some of them are colorful, but you don't really end up caring about them before the curtain comes down on the whole thing. And also, another sure sign that you have taken a wrong turn in life is if you end up in a cesspit like Ireland. And this story does. It decamps to Ireland for a bit of time. I'm not 100% sure. I've been watching my fellow co-hosts because that is the primary joy of this for me, is watching all of them, seeing their takes on things. And I think it was Lukash who mentioned that it's, or maybe it wasn't him, one way or another, somebody mentioned that it looked like the writer was looking back on this era and saying, yeah, chaotic, yes, bloody, yes, uh, wasteful, yes, but these were giant people and fascinating, and we don't have their like. It looks almost like that is true. It looks almost like the writer of this book is intentionally rubbing your nose in the fact that it's only pygmy people, shallow creatures, after Gunnar and after Njal and after all of these huge characters have left. It doesn't seem like there's much left that hangs a story on. I certainly got that impression. It's never good. It's never a good sign when you're reading a swashbuckling epic of some kind or other, and you get to the end and you're sort of toe tapping for it to be over, for it to be done with. I'm not the first person. I don't think I'm even the first person this time around in 2021 to make the comparison with Lord of the Rings, where Sam and Frodo succeed in destroying the One Ring. They are plucked from the jaws of death. They are plucked from the molten sides of Mount Doom by the eagles. And there you go. And Sam makes his way back home and says, well, I'm back. But no, no, a huge amount happens after that. And they were praised with much praise. Happens about 100,000 times with me. Every single little plot line is concluded. And in the most self-congratulatory, it's just watching dignitaries shake hands for 100 pages. And I can't be the only person who gets to that stuff in Lord of the Rings, even though I love Lord of the Rings. And it's kind of toe-tapping for it to be over, because the story has ended. This is all anticlimax. And it just, in Lord of the Rings, it just gets worse, because the appendices to Lord of the Rings contain incredibly fascinating stories that I wish we had seen instead of hearing about them in an appendix. But I'll get to that if we ever do a huge Lord of the Rings read-along. I haven't done one of those in years. I'd love to do one of those. Oh my, I would love to do one of those. Maybe with the same group, one way or another. That concludes Njal Saga. If you haven't ever read this book, I want to warn you that it ends on a protracted anticlimax, where you're going to be after the if you want to call it a theme. I realize it's a little bit reductive to call it a theme, but nevertheless, if you want to call the theme of this benighted, barbaric pattern of revenge violence, if you want to call that the theme, well, that theme culminates and then ends. And there's squabbling and chaos after that, but it doesn't feel like there are any real three-dimensional people for it to affect. And if you're reading this for the first time and you're getting to all of that violence and to all of those signature scenes, just be aware of the fact that you're going to hang around for a bit after that. A little bit longer than I think is necessary, but who am I to criticize a 1,000-year-old work of great literature? Anyway, that is Njal Saga for this time around. I will leave a link to all of my co-hosts. This was tremendous fun. We've done the whole usual buddy read thing, so we've done all of these coordinated videos, but we've also had a Voxer group, and I have come to love the discussion in the Voxer group. I would love it if we could read other things together, but I don't make the rules here, so we'll see. But in the meantime, this was a thrill, just a thrill. So that's it for me for Sagalong. It's been wonderful fun. We'll see what shape it takes in 2022 if all of us are here, Odin willing. And in the meantime, I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you, BookTube.